Okay, we enter, the 1972 year. And I'm looking at this particular photograph here. Now, the lineup in the boat that year, funnily enough, through the 3 years I was rowing in the Animals, the only seats we broadly brought new people into, and then they tended to go in the subsequent year with the bow and the two-seat. There was always a nucleus there. And when I've looked at the 71, 72 and 73 photographs, there's one thing, and I hadn't really thought of it until I looked at it more recently, that on stroke side, conventional stroke side, there was no change with stroke 6 and 4 in the 3 years. That's Martin stroking, myself 6, Tom Galligan at 4. They didn't change at all in those 3 years, you know. So it helps, it's a unit, you know what I mean? You get to know the guys you're rowing behind, as it were, you know. I should say something at this stage about Tom and his general style and how we related to Tom. We all found it very easy to relate to Tom because he was a country guy, so to speak, and he would appeal to the instincts of you know, do it for your parish sort of thing, you know what I mean? He could appeal to visceral instincts and sentimental even instincts of, you're doing it for your family, you're doing it for your little parish, come on up now, what are you made of, you know, this sort of stuff. And it worked very well. But Tom wasn't and isn't just a simple countryman, as anybody who knows him. He's extremely erudite sort of fellow with all sorts of interests, and you could talk to him and he was great, talking literature and so forth. And Tom was a collector of Malton prints and all this sort of stuff, you know. I'm not suggesting that people from the country can't be civilized, and I'm not holding out an example as a rare example. Of course he's not. But that's the sort of guy that he was. He was a heavy smoker in those days too. And very often a point of emphasis after a session, you know, or a training session, was I can visualize Tom with a cigarette in his hand and, you know, emphasizing the point like this. And another occasion I remember, I don't know whether it was this year or 72 or 73, but it certainly occurred, and I think most of the guys will remember it. After a particular piece going upstream, somewhere up the far bank, Tom lost the head altogether. You know, what he didn't say, it wasn't printable stuff, you know, but he made the emphasis very clear by lifting up his bike and fecking it, I'll just use the word fecking it into the road. Yeah. And walking back down the bank. Now, that's a powerful way of saying to a crew, you've got to change something, or I didn't like what I saw here, but it was never a lack of effort. That's all I can say about those years. There was never any shirking whatsoever. Nobody sat on their oars or anything like that, you know. Anyway, I think we're drifting into the 72 season at this stage. I'm looking at what's recorded here in the photograph. Winners at the Erin, Dublin Head and the Gannon Cup. 20th at Putney, which is a fairly decent result, because the real trick at Putney, apart from anything else, is staying out of the stream, and it requires a Thames lighterman's knowledge of things. And some crews would actually manage to get a London-based cox, and turn it to their advantage. So Irish crews in general, it's probably one of the things that makes it more difficult for them to do really well at Putney, because it's an art to steer just right on the Putney course. The regatta wins, Queen's Trinity, Carlow, Drogheda, represented Ireland in the quadrangular at Blessington. Yeah, I'll deal with the domestics first, perhaps, in this. Now, in this crew, adverting earlier to what I said about changes in the bow seats, Martin was still there. Jim Skelly was now rowing down at 7, yeah, as he may have been previously. I was at 6, Pat Brady was 5, Tom Galligan was 4. And now we had a tall guy from Limerick, the tallest guy on the crew, I suppose one of the tallest guys in those years, a guy called Dave Keyes. Dave had done hotel management. He sort of came to medicine as a mature student, but he was a very engaging sort of a guy, and he was rowing at 3. John Kenny, a guy called John Kenny, had come in at 2. He's an accountant. I think he's living in South Dublin, Bray. And Ned Sullivan, you've heard of Ned Sullivan already. And Ned sneaked in the bar. Another thing I want to, and it just comes to me now, during practices in, let me see, in 72 and in 73, and it happened in the same spot, we were doing sprints coming down past what we used to call the doctor's house, where Jim Wallace used to live. Its old name was the doctor's house. And for some reason, maybe there was a bit of weed intruding, the bowman in successive years, and I can recall it so well, caught an almighty crab, or caught out of the boat. And I remember being at 6 and a head bobbing up between myself and Martin on both occasions, you know. It's just one of the things, 2 seasons in a row, and happened to be the bowman. Dave, poor Dave, passed away. He did medicine in College of Surgeons, took his fellowship, went to Canada, to the States, somewhere out in the wilds of Canada, you know. And I don't know what year it was, he died. He was always into fitness, and he just closed the surgery one evening, as he was wont to do, put on his gear and went out for a run, and just dropped dead on the run, like, you know. And he was a guy who was fit, you know. Gosh. Oh, he would have to have been in his 40s, I'd say. I was like a bolt from the blue, you know. I remember writing a letter to his mother. I think he lived in the Ennis Road in Limerick, and saying how much he meant to the crew. Sorry. Anyway, the quadrangular was in Blessington that year, and that was an opportunity for us to see on home waters some really good, you know, neat oars, if you like. I forget the crew, was it London Rowing Club or whoever, or it may have been, it could have been Thames Tradesmen or Leanders. One of these crews was sent over anyway. And I have a clear vision of them practicing, going under the bridge in Blessington and looking at the precision of their oar work. Ours wasn't quite as neat or as seemingly languid as theirs was, you know. I must say that in 72, and I've mentioned this to Tom years ago, I'm convinced that Tom, by this stage we were of course rowing in what we would call fine wooden boats, you know, with a polished hull and so forth. I'm convinced in 72, the great measurement in those days was the inboard versus outboard ratio, you know what I mean? And I'm convinced Tom had us on a gearing that was not conducive to us rowing as well as we could. Do you know what I mean? Whether he felt, you're big guys, I know what you can do, you can handle this sort of stuff. But it was always my impression that in the year of 72, we had come up to 11, 71 to 72, but we didn't kick on incrementally very much in terms of style, so to speak. Do you know what I mean? It was quite hard going, quite laboured. In other words, you weren't necessarily getting the return for the effort that was going in. And I always put it down to a gearing, which he may not admit to, but I'm convinced that he had altered it. Because sometimes gearings would be altered, and the crew wouldn't necessarily be encouraged to ask or see or stand over while the measurements were being done. You know what I mean? You were told, right, out you go, and that sort of stuff. Anyway, that's just my impression. We were beaten in the quarter final of the ladies' plate that year by a crew from Laha, the university in Holland. Laha, they were the eventual winners. We were beginning to improve in Henley. Now that I remember, the crew that beat us in 71 was Aberdeen University. Okay. In that particular year, I was in the first senior 4 as well, and there's a photograph of it here. I was stroke, Jim Skelly was 3, Tom Galligan was 2, and Pat Brady was bow. And we won at Queen's, Limerick, Carlow, Drogheda, and Athlone. And we represented Ireland in the quadrangular in Blessington. So I was in the 4 and the 8 that year in Blessington. We were beating that year by Wallingford in the semi-final of the Britannia. That was the other thing. nowadays, if you target an event at Henley, you have to decide which one it is. It's must be almost impossible to entertain the prospect of winning 2 finals in the same Henley, you know what I mean? Especially 8s and 4s, whatever other classes you might enter. It's almost impossible. So to some extent we were maybe between 2 stools here. Although Laha were such a class crew that I think they were more or less, they were clearly destined to win the ladies in 72. Wallingford were a class crew as well. Out of the Wallingford crew came guys called Cusack. I remember their names very well. And they went on to become one of the first crop of English international lightweights and medalists at world level. And
was it Wallingford had the lightweight for in 74 or something?
they could have had, some of that crew were destined for what you might call great things, you know what I mean? So we weren't able to hold on to them. I were a couple of lengths behind them, do you know what I mean? But as a 4, they were in a different class, if you like. I can recall Limerick, yeah, I don't recall much about that particular 4. I was coxing that year, but I do recall in Limerick that the regatta that year was rowed on the tide below the bridge. And we had to come up and pass a point called Barrington's Pier, which was on the left-hand side. And because we were also rowing an 8 and so forth, I remember the guys behind me in the boat, I just kept our crew about half a length ahead of, I think it was Queen's or something like that. And the boy said, no, push it away. And I sort of felt, if I pushed it further away, we might pay for it, do you know what I mean? So I just sat in front of Queen's. And anytime they did a little push, I'd do a little push off. And I remember the guys coming in after the race and saying, Jesus, you know, don't do that again. I said, okay guys, I'll try it a different way the next time, you know. But I remember it so clearly, you know. Okay, is that 72 more or less? Have you a question around that here?
72, because the one thing Martin and Jim mentioned was the 72 championships in the 8.
Ah, yes, of course. Yeah, okay. That year the water level fell in Blessington. Okay, so the start had to be moved up by, I'd say, several hundred meters at least. And the finish line had to be, if you like, aligned between 2 points. And we had to row under the bridge and finish on the upper side of the bridge, on the Blessington village side of the bridge, if you like. The guards had a fairly decent crew at that stage. They had emerged. UCG had more or less, after the 71 season, had more or less gone. By the way, one of the guys in that Galway crew at the time, and I just mentioned him now, was a guy called Billy Lawless. Yeah, Billy's family owned a large dairy herd, and they more or less fed Galway with milk for years. So they sold that up and they bought pubs in Galway. They owned the Tribesman pub in Eyre Square, for instance, and other things. Now, Billy subsequently has emigrated to the States. Billy was a friend of President Obama. Billy got a senator nomination from the government to represent the diaspora, if you like, the undocumented Irish and the green cards and all the rest in the States, you know. So Billy was a member of that crew. Billy never was really a student in UCG, but this was sort of covered up, because anytime when we queried it, a bit of paper or a card was produced, you know. But I think Billy will admit himself, he never actually darkened the doors as a student in UCD. In those days, having your student thing was very important. Well, in my case, I wrote in 73. I signed on for a PhD here that I didn't pay any much attention to. But I had a student card, you know. Anyway, that's a digression. The race itself on the championship, the guards were really trying to put it up to us. It was the most nip and tuck 8's championship race we ever had. And my memory of it all, at that stage, yeah, Skelly was rowing in front of me at 7. My memory of it was Don Redmond, being the cox of the guards at the time, he would call for a push or a 10, and very audible 10, and they'd push and they'd come back up again. And we would have to respond by another 10. So it literally was a tit-for-tat race all the way up. And we were in severe oxygen debt as we came under the bridge. As we actually came under the bridge, the guards were, say, that much ahead to someone leaning over the parapet of the bridge. So their hopes and the hopes of their supporters rose, obviously, correspondingly. But the actual fact was that the line itself was staggered from the far side to the Blessington side. And the stagger came sort of from slightly higher right to slightly lower left. And I remember at one stage, and we only had 20 strokes to go, and Jim was in agony. I could hear his voice, and he was, and this one. I said, Jim, just keep going. Only 5 to go, only 4 to go, only 3 to go, and all the rest of it. And over the line. And honestly, when you cross the line, because there wasn't a visible, you know what I mean, there was a moment of indecision. Did we win or did we not win? And the guards were sure they win. And there are some of them to this day who may say that they won, but they actually were wrong. We did it by that much. That was the closest championship race that we ever had. So that was 72, okay? Anything else you want to prompt me on the 72 season? No?
No, that was the main, was that Martin and Jim just picked it out as the hardest race
That they had ever had.
I think Martin was maybe worried about Jim.
The noises, he was making noises, and I mean, people were genuinely, seriously suffering, you know. But I just said, we've got to hang on here, you know what I mean? We're nearly there. Because you weren't even aware exactly where the finish line was. Like the traditional metro, you would know at some stage by the slipway or the old boat shed or something. You knew where you were coming into the proximate. This was, you kept going until somebody told you to stop, which is cruel in a way, you know. Now we enter the 73 season, and as is our practice, we change the bound 2 seats again. Now, this crew has changed in that Jim Skelly's gone back to 3, and Dave Keyes has moved down to 7. So the lineup is Martin Stroke, Dave Keyes 7, myself 6, Pat Brady 5, Tom Galligan 4, Jim Skelly 3, Dennis O'Shaughnessy at 2. Dennis had been a successful, what you call junior. They won the junior pot, and I think he was drafted in because his physique, he was long, tidy, and so forth. And a guy called Jerry Walsh did ag. He was from Wexford or Waterford.
Dennis was from Dublin, was he?
Yeah. I did mention early on that Tom himself had a certain attitude, at least one that he expressed, maybe jocosely, that the best crews had the fewest or no Dubliners in them, you know. And naturally we subscribe to that too. I mean, why wouldn't we? You know? So Dave Keyes was the smoothest 7-man that I have ever rode behind, and that I think most people will acknowledge. He had an effortlessly long, smooth stroke. He was a joy to row behind, and he must have given a great rhythm up on bow side, you know. He made it just look so easy, and he was a laid-back sort of character as well. Now, I mentioned 72 as a year where we, technique-wise, had gone a certain bit but didn't seem to push on. But when we went into 73, possibly at that stage maybe we'd got a new fine boat as well. At some stage a new fine boat had come in, either in 72 or 73. But that crew was a crew that the boat sang that year. To me, that really was the crew that really shifted things along. We just mentioning some of the things here. I was in the second senior 4 at that stage, stroking. Martin was stroking the first senior 4. We won at Trinity and Metro. The first senior 4 won at Trinity and Ghent. We were the first UCD crew to go and row in what was a continental regatta, which was in Ghent in Belgium. And we won the 8s in our class, and the first and the senior 4 won. The first senior 4 won those, and that was the first time I think an actual Irish crew as such won on the continent, you know. And I can remember we stayed in Ghent, and we were driven over around the place by Geoffrey Page in a Devon convertible Volkswagen. You know those old things? I've heard of them, have you not? Yeah. I mean, you fit out the back of, it's a Volkswagen van, but you've got a little cooker and a little kitchen, a little sofa and everything. But this was the mode of transfer around the place. I remember he took us to Bruges and all this sort of stuff and showed us the sights and so forth. But after we won the 4 and the 8s, I remember Tom in tears. He felt he cracked something, you know. It was a singular moment at the time, you know. Well, yeah, it was. I forget who we beat in Ghent. The time is down as 6 minutes 8.9, which is, that's prosaic enough, if you like, you know what I mean. By the way, I should mention, wooden boats and wooden oars. The oars were English manufactured wooden oars. I still have a half an oar in my house. And the oars, through use and so forth, tended eventually to give at the loom. So when somebody cracked their oar, usually in practice, was always in practice, we never touched wood, we never broke it in a race, they could claim that oar. So you can guess what sort of a game began, you see. So all you had to do was go for a hard catch just in your practice, slightly earlier than somebody else, and the chances were that you could achieve the breaking of your oar at the loom, and then you could cart it off as a prize trophy, you know what I mean? Just let's say a few oars were broken that way. Okay. Yeah. You see, in those days, you know, we didn't have Dreisegackers or anything like that. Galway were ahead of the time. They were the people who introduced a boat called the Donneratico, that's manufactured in Italy, and it was a smooth machine. I should have said Mike Kavanagh was instrumental, I think. He used to pump money into the UCG crew as well, you know. In the background to all of this, of course, because we were winning, the OC interest of the OCs of the time began to peak, and the Henley Appeal, as it was called, was a means of subventing the crew in Henley, and the monies began to flow in as success began to become apparent, you know. Right, it says here we won in Ghent and we won in Trinity Regatta, which was, these were record times at the time, 5 minutes, 6 seconds. We won the 8s at Marlow Regatta. We won Marlow before we went to Henley that year. And subsequently we won the senior 8s at the home countries regatta, which was held in Nottingham. The first time an Irish 8 had won the home international 8s, if you like. We won the senior championship at Blessington. I recall that race. It was so different from 72. We were really rowing really well. The boat was swimming along. And in my mind, we were like the crew that I saw from the UK practicing in Blessington in 72. We were now that crew. The visual image of our rowing, in my mind, was at that level now. You know what I mean? It was a seriously long and good crew. In fact, the coach of the Guards at the time, Tom was reasonably friendly with him, Brendan Dwan, who had his son subsequently rowed with. Brendan's passed away now, isn't he? He one day said to Tom that the nicest oarsman he saw in both the Guards crew and this crew was actually Dave Keyes, he said. He has this lovely send, lovely effortless draw on the thing, you know, without, and very efficient and everything. So another tribute to poor Dave. Right, we're talking now about the ladies' plate. It says here we beat University of London easily in the first round. Oh yeah, we had a record pre-Henley time. Page made us row the course on the stopwatch, and we had a record pre-Henley time. I don't know whether it's recorded here or whatever. In the second round we met, it's misspelled here, ISIS, and they had 4 or 5 blues in the boat. And it was only after the race that Page came up to us and he said that ISIS expected to win that race, they said, you know. I mean, why wouldn't they, you know? We maybe were a bit of an unknown quantity. We beat them by a canvas. A heck of a race, you know. Again, a race where we got out, and any time they came back, we were pushing and repelling all the time. But it was a race that took a lot out of us in a way too, because it was a very tough race. We went into it ourselves. Yeah, it's ISIS, so what sort of thing, you know? Well, there is a bit of pedigree in ISIS, you know. We lost in the quarters to the Huskies, University of Washington, by a length. It's a race I think we should have won. Maybe there was a hangover from the hard second round, but we let them get a little bit at the beginning, and they more or less held that all the way through. We just couldn't bring them back. The people, I don't know whether they won that year or not, or whether Harvard lightweights beat Washington. Did they? Well, maybe in 71 was it then? I should mention that a crew that was stalking the ladies' plate in those days, which was for the college crews, it's now renamed. It's been given over to a different class of boat now, isn't that right? No, it's not colleges anymore. But the Harvard lightweights were the gold standard, really. You know, they obviously had a large pool to pick from. And I remember one of their weight maintenance techniques to keep those lightweights involved spitting, an old Chinese habit, you know, around spitting, keeping the weight down. But they were a class crew, a really, really class crew. They would always be seated, and any year, there was a very rare year that the Harvard lightweights wouldn't win the ladies' plate. The actual, what I'm really saying as well, that the opposite